I thank you once again and welcome to this sharing episode. Thank you.
We're here to discuss the use of ICT tools.
So today there is a big debate in Sri Lanka as to whether RTI is actually a fundamental right or not.
Welcome again. My name is Nicole Anand for Action. So that's what we hope that all of you are here.
It's not easy for them if you consider the poor infrastructure in rural India.
South Asia, and you have discussed those.
20 to 25 people is coming every day to each center.
Before that, everything, whatever was available on the internet, it was in English.
In a very strong way, advocacy components in others, they were emerging.
Population working abroad was less than 700,000.
I would like to thank each one of you for joining us and welcome you to this day-long workshop. Thank you very much for your time and effort invested for contributing to this knowledge process which we have initiated together with World Bank Institute to look at innovations happening on access to information through ICTs. What we intend to do today is to share our research finding and then enrich our knowledge collectively based on that research findings combined together with your insight and experience in getting a way forward of how ICTs can very effectively be used for enabling access to information for a citizen-centric support mechanism of governance delivery. The reason we have been doing this because while we talk about access to information, ICT comes automatically. They do have a very symbiotic relationship because ICT enables facilitation of information and knowledge among people, and therefore we thought that it will be useful to look at systematically how the experiments on ground are making a change. We have looked 7 initiatives as per the case studies. 2 are from Bangladesh, 2 very interesting innovations. I'm happy that the members from those 2 innovations are here today in this room. And there are 5 innovations which we looked at India. Would be sharing, my colleagues would be sharing those outcomes, and then we would encourage your question and answer and clarifications and actually additional thoughts so that we enrich that body of knowledge. In the afternoon, we have requested distinguished panelists to build on that and to give us a collective way forward. So that's the structure of today's deliberation. With this very, very small introduction, I thank you once again and welcome to this sharing episode. Thank you.
Today I would like to touch upon briefly on open government issues, and particularly regarding the importance of developing citizen-centered ICT applications to enhance the implementation of the Right to Information Act here in Bangladesh and transparency policies. While we're here to discuss the use of ICT tools and how they can contribute to open government by fostering transparency, citizen participation, and public accountability, ICT tools are not a silver bullet that will solve all problems. Many researchers agree, acknowledge that greater transparency will not lead to increased accountability unless civic engagement is strengthened and people act upon the information. E-government is no longer viewed as the provision of information or services via internet, as it was defined a few years ago. It's a two-way communication which is transforming the way citizens interact with government. And as Bangladesh moves forward in implementing its Access to Information program, demand for transparency and accountability increases. I'm sure there will be more opportunities for the use of ICT facilitated initiatives. I think there is great potential for the use of ICT in Bangladesh and in the South Asia region, particularly given the youth population. There is great potential among youth groups regarding the development and use of ICT for transparency and accountability, particularly as we know that young people are quite tech-savvy and familiar with this technology. Let me conclude by thanking all the participants today here. I also want to thank the organizers, OneWorld Foundation, India, Naimur, and his incredible team for undertaking this project in a very, very short period of time. I'm sure you will have time to look at the cases documented and are quite impressive. It's quite impressive the work that they have done. I also want to thank IPSA for hosting this event. And finally, I would like to thank the Canadian International Development Agency, CIDA, which has been supporting the Access to Information program that I coordinate at the World Bank Institute for the last 6 years here in Bangladesh through the CIDA WBI governance partnership program in Bangladesh. So thanks to all.
What is crucial for those technologies to work is for information to be made available. And that is where that is where the biggest battles are. The very idea of a human being's right to know what his or her government is doing is quite ancient. It's quite old, actually. It was a blank piece of paper with the signature and seal of the king, and he would sell it to his nobles. The nobles would buy that and keep it as a major weapon. If they didn't like somebody, they would write the name of that person and have him thrown in the Bastille. People had absolutely no clue as to where these guys went. They just knew that they've been taken away and put in the Bastille. People died there. That's why if you look at the progress of the French Revolution in 1789, one of the first symbols of absolutist monarchical power that falls is the Bastille prison. That is the first place of attack. So the revolutionaries barge into the Bastille prison and they release all the inmates. And the revolutionaries get down to writing something that has become a historical document. For the first time in any country, in any part of the world, did a set of people decide that, look, we are human beings. And because we are human beings, we are entitled to lead a dignified life. We can't be oppressed, we can't be subjugated, we should not be exploited, or we should not be harmed in any way. Therefore, these are the set of rights that every human being must be entitled to. And interestingly, that is the forerunner of the concept of human rights. They called it the Declaration of the Rights of Man. And for the first time in that declaration, just like other rights like right to life, right to property, right to freedom of speech and expression, right to fair trial, which we are all very familiar with, there was also something called right to know. Because what happened was, these people were taxpayers before the revolution. They paid taxes to the king, they paid tithes to the church, they were in debt with the moneylender, the police could extract money from them. Of course, the revolution, as most revolutions do, they eat up their own children. So all these beautiful people, very forward-thinking, progressive-thinking people, were all killed by the same use of the guillotine. But the ideas that they generated survived beyond their lifetimes. And in fact, that right to know is what forms the basis of Article 19 in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And that's post-World War scenario. There's a big demand for human rights at the end of the Second World War, because once the World War came to an end, it became very clear that Europe and parts of Asia and Africa had suffered such gross human rights abuses. I think the very last 1 or 2 years of the Second World War, there was just no information at all that so many people, so many Jews and so many Poles and so many homosexuals and so many gypsies were all being exterminated, through gas chambers. There was no information. So when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was written down by about 50 countries, they said one of the human rights should be the right to freedom of speech and expression, right to freedom of opinion, and that right includes, as a part of it, the freedom to seek information, freedom to receive information, and freedom to impart information. So seek and receive is something that is so central to the right to know. Imparting information is central to the right to freedom of the press. And you can only impart information when you have access to information.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome again. My name is Nicole Anand. First off, I'd like to introduce our team, starting off with Aryamala Prasad, Sapna Kedia, Aditi Dayal, and Atrika Hazarka. So the inspiration of this report came from the policies that have erupted all over the global south and certainly in South Asia over the past 5 to 10 years that aim to promote transparency and accountability in democratic governance. Namely, we're talking about the right to information that Venkatesh so aptly describes earlier. The RTI was enacted in India in 2005 and enacted in Bangladesh in 2009. And while there's been a great deal of progress towards the intended goal of RTI, which is bridging this gap between government and citizens and enabling the citizens to actually demand for their rights to public information, there have been some challenges, and there are challenges that remain. So, for instance, there is still somewhat of an unclear or cumbersome process that has it's resulted in citizens having certain inappropriate expectations from the system. Another such challenge is that there are less accessible RTI has been less accessible to certain segments of the population. So what we're referring to here are the literate or the poor or other disadvantaged or marginalized populations that may not have the money to travel to a government office or the ability to fill out an RTI form by themselves. So we identified the 7 innovation practices. According to what we did is pretty much break down this high-level concept of access to public information and looked at access on its own, information on its own, and technology on its own, as well as the interlinkages and the interplay between them. So, and we achieved this through secondary and primary research, both gathering qualitative and quantitative data. On the qualitative side, we pursued many interviews with key stakeholders. We traveled to the field for each of these innovations where we were given demonstrations of the different types of technologies that were being used. And in terms of quantitative data, which we really tried to focus on, particularly with the end users, we did design surveys and we pursued that for quantitative data. This is our framework for analysis. We had developed this both for identifying the good practices as well as using it as a benchmark for analysis. What you can see here is really 3 processes and how they translate into impact. So we can begin with the existing models of access. So here we've defined 3 models of access, G to C being the first, government to citizen, which would pretty much mean that the government was the prime facilitator of access for this information. The second is something we have entitled 3 to C, or the third sector to citizen, either the third sector or some sort of public-private partnership. The last thing that we looked at is the type, form, and use of information as it affects governance. And we looked at governance in terms of both democratic processes, so for instance, giving citizens a voice, and then we looked at public service delivery. So in sum, our framework for analysis really said that Impact will depend on the model of access, the mode of technology, and of course, in terms of information, first and foremost, the availability of information, but then, of course, the usage of information. And this means the form of information, so whether it be in the form of SMS or being written or being an audible message, and or the type of information, and making sure this type matches users' needs and preference. And they will, in real time, direct it to the appropriate public authority. Another such element is there is a newly integrated online feedback mechanism. So there is a survey. It hasn't been, there's not much usage till now, but it is available, and there's potential for some rich data being gathered through that.
Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. This project was launched in October 2009 in Bhilwara, Rajasthan. The objective of the project is to enable all the MG Narega process to strengthen public accountability and also to increase transparency at all levels of program implementation. Now, the Narega Act is unique in terms of its right-based framework. Now, anyone who is willing to perform unskilled labor can actually go to the government and demand for employment for 100 days per year per rural household. And to ensure the scheme's success, it's important that the person is actually aware of his or her right. What usually happens is that the person, due to low literacy level, is deceived by the public officials. And even if they are going to the panchayat office to receive information, the official is just not present there. And they have to make multiple visits to get a satisfactory information regarding the scheme. So to address all these issues, ICT ecosystem was developed, and it uses multiple technologies at various levels of implementation. As you can see in this picture, the process starts with a biometric registration at step 1, and then it moves on to the job card information that can be accessed through the information kiosk, which is a critical component of this ecosystem. And it's located at the local panchayat office, where a citizen can go and through the biometric identification can access the scheme-related information as well as individual specific information, like, for example, how many days that the person can get the employment for, or how much wage that the person has earned, anything specific related to that person, and also the legal entitlements under the scheme. In case they are not getting their unemployment allowance, they can just go to panchayat office and demand for that. The other interesting observation was the empowerment of women that has happened because of the use of technology. Now, usually in rural India, women are shy to approach men for information. So they were hesitant to go to panchayat office and ask for information. They can get the information, they feel confident about themselves. And they also found the community radio program useful in this ecosystem because it spreads the awareness about the scheme itself. Biometric attendance was useful because, of course, it reduces fraud in taking attendance. Even though this program has been successful and has created impact at ground level, there are a few gaps that needs to be addressed to make it much better. One is to enhance the portability of the program design to make it more inclusive. Right now, there are 2 info kiosks located at panchayat level for 10 villages. So people have to at least travel 12 kilometers, not if they are far away from those 2 kiosks. And it's not easy for them if you consider the poor infrastructure in rural India. So to make it to enhance it, we thought it will be a good idea to include a handheld device which can provide information. Now, there is a prototype that is being tested at Suwana block, but it's not an alternative to info kiosk as such that it doesn't provide all the information that one can retrieve. Now, the reasons could be the low level of literacy or the cost involved, because a person has to pay for the SMS. So we thought it will be a good idea to include a text-to-speech feature in the mobile-based solution as well, and especially because it has been very useful at the info kiosk to get information. The Forest Right Act was implemented in 2006 with the aim of providing traditional forest dwellers the opportunity to claim rights to the forested land that they have been living in or using it for their own sustenance. But in 2008, when the government actually started to implement the program, they realized that there are a lot of challenges in terms of verifying the claims. The first one was the requirement of the Act to actually verify the agricultural activities on the claimed land. Now, this had to happen before December 2005, and I think the government has very limited resources in terms of verifying if the land was used before 2005 for the agricultural purposes. So it was challenging for them to execute this mandate of the Act.
First of all, I would like to give thanks to the OneWorld and World Bank Institute for selecting DISE for All, one of the best case study. Basically, it is beyond our imagination because we were just working in the grassroots level. We never ever try to get these types of involved with these types of research and things. So we are very excited. Like the whatever we are just shouting last 4 or 5 years in Bangladesh that ICT for development is missing a big number of people, that is persons with print disabilities. Finally, I can say, okay, we somehow managed to include the people with print disabilities to access information. At first, I'd like to clarify something about the presentation. I just saw in the beginning, just you mentioned this is one of the initiative of A2I and UNDP. Basically, this is one of the DISE for All is the initiative of DISE Consortium and IPSA in Bangladesh, and in our journey we got as a supporter and partner is UNDP and Access to Information. I think we have started to work with them maybe since 2008, 2007, like that. So A2I and UNDP have supported us to convert the law in 3 formats. One is any law which is related with the people's life and livelihood, convert into digital talking books, and it's popular version, and our innovation is digital talking books. So this really give the opportunity for the people with print disability to access information. And one biggest thing, why we have started this DISE for All, I am a person with visually impaired. I am not seeing anybody. I am a person with visually impaired. And I study in university, college, school. I never ever got any accessible study materials to study. Just I only depend on my teacher's lecture and friends' help and family's help. Government really didn't provide a single accessible books for me to read. That's why when I was in Japan, got a scholarship and go there and learn about the technology for the people with visually impairment. I came back and I started to work for the people with visually impairment, and we found there is a big number of people who are persons with print disabilities. That is, you are saying that low literate or illiterate people. If you make a single digital talking books, it is contributing to the 50% of the people. And also now we have lots of content for the community radio. You know, community radio is going to year on very soon in Bangladesh. But we have many content we already developed in DISE technology. Finally, I'd like to mention something like DISE is, we are using most of the software are open source and free. That's why we don't need to buy any software. Secondly, we are using volunteer for convert books into digital talking books. Also, the money have spent for DISE for all, that is very small amount in terms of the success we have within this day. So hopefully, if we get the cooperation, our dream, all the printed materials should be in accessible format whenever it will be available for public. If you make a books, same time I will get the digital talking books. This is my rights. And digital talking books have all the feature which any citizen can get by reading a book. Thank you very much.
First, I'll answer Emily's question regarding the funding for I Paid a Bribe. It's part of an NGO called Janagraha, and they have their own team that's dedicated to ensuring that all the programs that they have receive funds. Now they receive funds from different organizations as well as individuals. Now we looked at the quarterly statement reports for I Paid a Bribe, and for the first 3 reports that I could access, their financial statements show that it was funded by an individual and as well as foundation called ICICI Foundation, and those 2 funds were utilized for the overall operations. Now, since it's a web portal and the team is relatively small, it's like a 4-member team, their overall cost for the project that was mentioned to us was less than 35 lakhs. I think it would be 3.5 million Indian rupees. So that's their overall cost, and that's somewhat of a general overview of their financial model. The case study that you probably have a soft copy of right now, the draft version, does mention all about their cost and their funding.
Now let me sort of introduce to you all the 3 panelists that we had. I'll start from my sort of the far end of the right-hand side of the table. We have Tamina Rahman, who is the Executive Director of DNet. He is with us, and he's been involved with this area of work for a long, long time and has got a number of new ideas that they have been able to come up with, and we're delighted to have him with us. We then have Mr. N.I. Khan, who is from the Prime Minister's office. He's the director of the national program known as Right to Information. I beg your pardon, Access to Information. And then we have Tamina Rahman, who is the country director of Article 19. She is with us, and she's also been involved with this area of work for quite some time. So we're delighted to have 3 of you with us. I was going to suggest that we give you 10 minutes to kind of make your presentation maximum. And what I will do, I'll give you a bit of a warning when you reach your 8th minute, and then you will have 2 minutes to round off your presentation. And the points that I would say that if you could focus on, but it's not mandatory, but if you could kind of bear in mind these following points when you're making your presentation, then I think it will be useful for us when we go into the discussion session. Firstly, I would say, looking at the importance of ICT in enhancing access to public information, especially within the context of RTI. Second, kind of effective and sustainable technologies that facilitate citizens' access to information. Third, the challenges of applying technology in access to information efforts that we have discussed and that you have looked at. And then fourth, adaptive aspects of ICT that are relevant in South Asian contexts. Now, obviously, these points you could touch upon, if you may, But I mean, it would be useful, as I said, for us when we discuss these issues. But the overall context in which we will be discussing this is the learnings from ICT facilitated access to information innovations in South Asia, and you have discussed those cases of, that we've just heard earlier in the day. So basically, based on that experience, we would like to sort of look at the learnings and take it and how to take these things forward, these issues forward. So I would like to first invite Mr. N.I. Khan, if I may, to make his presentation. Thank you very much.
We set up 4,500 on Union Information and Service Center. In this center, we have laptops, computers, we have projectors, internet connectivity, and a little bit training for the persons who are working there. Altogether, 2 persons, one is male and another is a female person. Because the women, or girls, if they come, they feel homely there. This is why 1 male and 1 female entrepreneur. They are not government servants, they are entrepreneurs. They can earn any amount of money. So what are the services available there? Of the different services, the salient feature may be birth and death registration, public exam results online, government form download, mobile banking, I'll tell later on, it's on the way, access to livelihood content, employment information, visa application and processing, email and internet browsing, computer training, I'll tell also later on about this, something about the computer training, video conferencing in a web camera, maybe in that way, it's a small way, birth registration data entry, because birth registration project is going on, so some data entry is required, population census data entry already finished, I would say, photocopying, scanning, mobile phone service, vulnerable group development, VGD, what is called, and VGF card processing, online payment of utility bills. It is in the pipeline also. These are the services. So, November 11, we just started, but some of the centers, I can categorically say 869 centers have no electricity. So we set up their solar cells. It takes a little bit time, but initially it was 11th November when most of the centers started. Last year, November last year, 2010. And what is the present status? At present, all UICs earning 10 million per month. All, if we sum up all the UICs income, it is 10 million per month. And average is a little bit more than 2,000 per Union Information Center. And more than 200 UICs earning 10 to 40,000 taka, 10 to 40,000 taka. And if we plot a graph, we find that it is about 45 degrees. That means every time it is increasing in a very good direction. It's moving in a very good direction, positive direction. And at the same time, we have already MOU with 4 banks in 451 UICs, because we are going to deliver e-banking services. You know, only 10% people has access in the banks. So we want to have a branchless bank in this Union Information and Service Center.
So thank you, and I think next we would like to move on to Mr. Ononno Rehan. If you could make your presentation.
It's a great privilege to be here to share some experiences, also I think to highlight some challenges and how we can move forward. Actually, Mr. N.I. Khan did not mention many other initiatives which are very successful and really making some changes on the ground. I would like to mention particularly the sugarcane initiative, EPURG. It's a very great initiative where the farmers, the sugarcane farmers, are not only getting information, they're getting complete service. Like they cut their sugarcane at the right time and taking it to the sugar mill and selling it without any hassle and queue and getting the price. And on the other hand, the sugar mill produces better quality of sugar. So it's a great end-to-end, application of IT. It's a very simple solution, SMS-based, purchase order for the sugarcane producers. So there are many other services which actually have made change in the lives of poor people, marginalized people, and there are other initiatives which are on the pipeline. My organization, DNET, has been involved in making ICT meaningful to the marginalized people since 2001, and particularly the initiative which we call Polli Totho Information and Knowledge Center in the rural area. I would like to highlight some of the success factors or factors, if we fail to address them, which may initiative stumbling. Like one of them is critical mass of services or content. When you are in a community, you cannot offer service only for the farmer or for the children or for youth. So you have to offer services for each of the professional groups or each of the citizens so everybody should be benefited from a information system. That is one thing. So that's why the idea of content on multiple issues on agriculture, health, human rights, so everything actually we felt that it is needed. We developed Bangla language content because before that everything, whatever was available on the internet, it was in English or even offline. So the second critical success factor comes in that we have to focus on digital content, and content should be in Bangla language. And again, the learning curve shows that only text and picture doesn't benefit much because if you only show something, you can remember after 6 hours only 15%. If you only hear something, another 15 or 20%. But if you can see and hear, and if it's something moving, audiovisual, then you can retain at least 60% of the knowledge you are actually getting. So the second generation content development initiative focused on multimedia, and it is growing. And not only my institution, many other institutions are focusing on multimedia content development. And there are some specializations also. Some of them are focusing on human rights. Some of them are focusing on agriculture. Others are focusing on health. And also, Bhaskar is here. The DISE for All project is one of the projects included here. You see, it's a great achievement that also the community who cannot see or hear, for them also some content is there. But I think one thing we need to take it forward further. Like if we can develop text-to-speech software, or if we can develop translation, machine translation, Bangla machine translation. So these two tools actually enhance access to many people, which is not possible by a project like DISE for All. So I'd like to request the government, particularly A2I program, if we can invest in text-to-speech and translation, I think that would be a great achievement for us, for all of us.
Thank you very much, Onono. I mean, that was very succinct, and you've highlighted both some of the successes and also highlighting some of the policy initiatives that we have taken, the government has taken, and also some new ones that can be taken up in the months to come. So I'll now move on to our third panelist, Tamina Rahman. She is the country director of Article 19, and she will make her presentations.
Good afternoon, everyone. My role here today is actually to, which is to sort of contribute as a panel discussion on learnings from ICT facilitated ATI innovations in South Asia. So basically, I've decided to focus on what we've to distill some of the lessons learned from the discussions we had this afternoon. First of all, I'd like to congratulate WBI and also OneWorld Foundation for the project itself. I think the project itself is an innovative initiative in looking at actually identifying ICT initiatives and looking at the innovations involved in each of those projects. For those who have just who have not been here in the earlier part of the session, 7 case studies were presented, and they focused on Jankari, ICT ecosystem, DISE for all, citizens' voices, SMS-based monitoring system, geoinformatics for forest rights, and I paid a bribe. Each one of these case studies or cases or initiatives have their own characteristics, and the discussions brought out some of those characteristics. But one of the things I thought would have been useful was to look at how these case studies were selected. Were there any criteria on the basis of which these 7 case studies were selected, 2 from Bangladesh and 5 from India, or they could be self-selected, which is perfectly fine. And so a little more discussion on that would have been useful. In terms of the framework itself, I think the research focused on framework, which was assessing access, assessing innovation, and assessing information. I think this framework in itself is a huge contribution to evaluating ICT initiatives. I have done many evaluations myself, and I always begin with the framework. And I think ICT, there are many of you here who are kind of engaged in or developing ICT initiatives, and in terms of looking at what are the innovations or evaluating ICT initiatives, this framework itself will be a long-lasting contribution. It's a very simple. The other thing that came up was that almost all of these initiatives focused on collecting data, and the discussion that centered around was that collecting data in itself, is it good enough? Is it enough? Or in terms of moving on to ensuring accountability and transparency, collection of data is not enough, actually going beyond it. How do you use the data? How do you distill lessons learned and then move on into a phase of advocacy and coalition building? That was something that came up in the discussions, very much so. And it was proposed that in each of the initiatives there was, in some of them, in a very strong way, advocacy components. In others, there were emerging advocacy issues that were coming up. In terms of looking at let me then come to looking at these 7 case studies, some of the potential for replication in Bangladesh. I thought the case study that I liked most was I paid a bribe. I think that was by far the most interesting case study.
Thank you very much, Tamina. Let's open up the discussion to the floor and invite comments, questions from the participants here. We have heard from 3 panelists on a number of different points. Interesting issues have been raised. So let us have a discussion. I think always discussions can be very, very useful, fruitful. So let me open it up. And if you raise your hand, I will recognize that and probably ask you to put your questions.
I just want to make a couple of quick, I think 1 or 2 responses and 1 or 2 quick comments. Tamina, you mentioned about question, how were those case studies selected? We, in fact, worked with WBI to create the benchmark of selecting those case studies. and the final report, a draft of which is available on in your folder, would tell you about that benchmark. And then that benchmark was applied for a known set of initiatives, and picked up them. For example, one of the initiatives which we run, and personally I'm quite proud of, we applied that initiative on this benchmark and realized that it doesn't fit into public information which you are defining by the characteristics. So there's a benchmark, and I think the process of doing that was also a part of the contribution in generating body of that knowledge.
Morning. I coordinate the Access to Information program, and we have been looking mostly at the legal framework, supporting adoption of legislation on access to information. Here it's called Right to Information Act in South Asia. In other countries, Freedom of Information Acts, etc. But we realize that it's not enough, that having a legal framework, and how you can facilitate access to information with or without a law, and making use of ICT. In other countries, there is an emerging dialogue between a community of technologists and the freedom of information activists or right to information activists, which have a legal background. So there are two different communities that have not interacted much. And they realize that it's important to start talking about this. I mean, particularly, maybe too early here, but we heard about digital Bangladesh. In other countries are talking about this open data agenda. And they realize that it's important to come together. By hearing the diverse set of cases presented today, I see some some areas for inspiration here in Bangladesh. You mentioned the I paid a bribe, and I think it's relevant for Bangladesh, but for many countries where we work. But also the SMS monitor, and I think it's very important for monitoring. You said there are many social programs for here in Bangladesh, and I think that the SMS monitoring case that was presented from India could be very interesting to explore further here. Of course, we also heard about the ICT ecosystem for the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, and I understand there is an employment scheme here as well. I understand that actually the World Bank is supporting that. So the idea was actually to start a discussion. We don't have any concrete, next steps, but just hearing from you hear your reactions. What was more relevant from you based on this very small menu of 7 cases that was presented here, which were, as we mentioned earlier today, prepared in a very short period. So it's just to start a conversation to see how we can move forward.
First of all, I would like to inform you, RTI Act now in DISE format. We have digital talking books, the main version of the RTI Act. Then any visual impaired people and low literate people can access RTI Act through audio. And same time we are going to make it popular version and also digital talking drama. So that will be also available, and hopefully that will be available in the National Content Repository where you will find many digital talking books. Second point, like if we just recall our memory, like after before 4 or 5 years ago, there is no discussion was taken place about the persons with print disability. So I would like to request all of you to think. This is the prime time to think because of the digital Bangladesh. We need to consider the issues of visually impaired people community, and if you target it to the visually impaired people community, then it will contribute to the 50% of these countries low literate people. We call them persons with print disability. So the biggest barrier for DISE for all in Bangladesh is text to speech. If we have the text to speech, then any text which will be DISE standard, like Unicoded supported DISE standard, any text can be make digital talking books. So hopefully the government will take the initiative for make the text to speech available for the end user. Secondly, we people with disabilities always campaign before having the RTI Act to ensure the accessibility of people with disabilities. So I would like to request the Honorable Information Commissioner, we really want to, we really have to have all the website, all the information which will be available for the public, that should be accessible for all citizens, including people with visually impaired. Either we'll violate the UN Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It's called UNCRPD. There is the Article 9 and Article 21. Article 9 is accessibility. Article 21 is right to information. Also the RTI Act. So because Bangladesh already ratified and signed the UN Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Hopefully government will respond on that. Thank you very much.
I welcome this suggestion, but I want to inform the gentleman concerned that the Information Commission has already started the process for having the entire RTI Act in Braille so that it can be read and it can be understood. But I would also request the gentleman concerned again that in order to be consistent with law, you must take the first step first. And you should have sent us in the last 2 years the name of the designated officer. I don't see why it has not been done. And I'm hoping that while you expect things to be done by the rest of the world, you yourself will also take the first step and give in the designated officer's name. Thank you very much.
As Anai Khan sir has talked about the Union Information Service Center and the spread of the Union Information Service Center all over the country. I was just wondering that it's good to use technology and this facilitates delivery of services. But I'm just wondering that when we use ICT in the rural areas, we should also keep it in mind whether this shrinks the digital divide or whether it expands it. Because it may happen that by using ICT, we are probably, the poorest of the poor who are illiterate and who are not, they don't know how to use ICT, whether, they can have access to these facilities or not. It can happen from both ends. One is that they're illiterate, so they don't know how to use it. And also that as the Union Information Service Center model is developed as a business model, so they have to pay for the services. So I think we should have to also consider the pricing of the services at the union level, whether this is accessible to the poorest of the poor at the rural areas or not. And and also to comment on the 7 innovations. These are innovations, so they have been tried out, and we hope that they will be successful. But when we talk of converting innovations into practices, which means that they have to continue and to sustain over time. So when we talk of using ICT to facilitate access to information, we probably have to look at these innovations as business cases, that what will be the source of funding and whether these are dependent on particular sources or not. So this is an area probably we also have to consider, that how will this be self-sustainable, that these innovations, so that this can run successfully over a period of time, and so that these innovations can become practices. And on RTI, I mean, although we have had RTI for the last 2 years, I mean, RTI is something that is not yet fully practiced. And I remember the Chief Information Officer of India was in Bangladesh a couple of years back, and he was interviewed. And the gentleman mentioned in the interview that one of the ways how RTI was popularized in India was to, make RTI practiced by the government servants themselves. This is what the Chief Information Officer mentioned, that what they did is that they tried to convince the government servants first that RTI can work and you can benefit from it. And that was a first step that they took in India. I don't know whether it's a lesson learned for Bangladesh or not. Thank you.
In Union Information Center, we have raised certain points I think is very pertinent. One is whether they will give information on payment or not. Certain things like photocopies, form download, visa processing, this and that these people will give some money. But in case of agriculture information, health information, other information, they will not take any money. It's free of cost. But still, our worry is whether they will be busy with all this payment issue related service or whether they will give any attention in this service. That is also our worry. But it is to be looked into how it works. But we are thinking that when we find this sort of problem, we'll be setting some touch screen like thing with logogram or something so that they can get this service. But yet, you ask another problem is that most of the or 50% people may be illiterate. So how these people will work? But we have an encouraging results in Purji is that, say I am illiterate, but I am taking help of other person. It's called indirect literacy or something like this. So in Purji it works very well. So we are a little bit hopeful in this regard. And as regards digital divide, most of our mobile phone, we cannot send Bangla SMS, only using the Roman alphabet, not Bangla SMS, only Nokia and maybe another one or two mobile company. So we already sat with this mobile company. We have already requested that please make your set Bangla enable. Otherwise, we will not allow you to export your mobile set in our country, maybe within next 1 year. And we are working and getting good response. So what happens, that will a bit reduce digital divide, I would say. Thank you very much. But still, there are questions, but we are hopeful that when these are the shops, this union information are the shops, but the products are in different offices of Upazila, different offices of districts, and in directorates. So when these offices will be connected and having this system, electronic system, then they will be giving many, many orders. So I think it will be sustainable. This is our plan, but let us wait and see what is happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the panelists for being very succinct and to the point, and they've kept to their time, and they have made number of very useful, doable sort of points, and I think it's been very, very productive. We've had some very intelligent remarks coming from the floor, and I think overall, given the sort of the title of the session, panel discussion and learnings, and I suspect this learning element will continue. We are, I think, at a very formative stage. Many interesting things are happening, and I think we will be able to, in another 6 months or a year's time, we'll be able to come forward with more learnings and take the whole issue forward. I think, in summing up, I would say that there are a number of issues which have come up in terms of how citizens will be able to access information and how the quality of service delivery will be improved once some of these projects are in full swing. And also the challenges will continue. I think it is something that I think we face here in the south, also in the north. So every time we address a set of challenges, some new challenges will come up.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's always a pleasure to be able to share views through discussion, because being a student of English literature, I used to teach English literature in Dhaka University 44 years ago. Some of you were not born then, I guess. But one of the things I used to request my students from the master's class to do was to read a tract. It was called Aeropagetica. It was written by John Milton in the 17th century. And he had two very interesting comments in that. One was in Latin, non scholae sed vitae decimos. And the other one was discussion is knowledge in the making. Now, non scholae sed vitae decimos means not for school, but for life we learn. And I had to study Latin when I was in St. Gregory's School, but that was 60 years ago. And we had to learn it in a very thorough manner, because we had to study logic later on, and Latin was in logic, deductive logic particularly. Now, what we have had today is really a very interesting exposition of aspiration, of sharing of experience, of, let's say, cognizance of the difficulties that are being faced, the establishing of benchmarks, and how to create a paradigm or a matrix whereby the entire process can be facilitated. And I must admit, I would like to first of all thank the organizer. And Naimur got in touch with me. I was at that time when he sent me the message. I was in China. And we were having discussions in China. I shall share with you some of these points which were raised in China. And since then, I have been also to Norway, to Sweden, and sharing experiences in Uppsala. I was to be a student there in Uppsala University. and then also in Belgium, in Brussels. Now, the whole purpose of what you all did today is to recognize that the information process today is an information without frontiers and without any parameters, without any thresholds, where you will not be able to say that this information is particularly pertinent only for this segment of the population. Because as we have seen from WikiLeaks, that nothing is sacrosanct. Nothing at the end of the day is totally confidential. If it affects public interest, then the public has a right to know about it. Now, in this context, I'll highlight three important elements which have been undertaken by the present government. The government of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. The first time round, this will show the egalitarian approach of this government with regard to certain basic principles of governance. The first thing she did, once she came to power the first time round in 1996, was to say that, okay, guys, we have the Bangladesh television, BTV, the government channel, but then it was also known as the Raja Ujir Golamer channel, which is that they always telecast what was only good for the government of the day. Nothing anti-government could be ever heard or seen on the television channel. So what did she do? She said that it's only fair that the public, the general people, should be able to find an alternative. So she introduced Ekushe TV. The first time a private electronic media channel was opened, not for the radio, but by television. She was giving an indication. It was a connotation that if you are reporting an incident or an event, in real time, there is an alternative who will also be reporting that incident, and if they show that what you are saying is wrong, you will be embarrassed. So don't do that. There's healthy competition. Now, because of that, today there are 14 television channels from the private sector, and you have a healthy competition. So she opened one window, so you could actually enter a room and see what the room looks like. The second thing she did was even more pertinent. This I recall, I was at that time in 97, I was ambassador in Rome. And I had come here in 1907 at that time to discuss about the visit of the Italian Prime Minister to Bangladesh.
On behalf of OneWorld, I would like to thank all of you for attending the workshop today. I would also like to thank Ambassador Mohammed Zamir for his informative speech and suggestions, Mr. Manzoor Hassan for moderating the panel discussion, the panelists, Dr. Ananya Rehan, Mr. Khan, and Dr. Tamina Rahman, and Mr. Nayak. I would also like to thank Mr. Mendiburu and Esquivel for the support in organizing the workshop, and last but not the least, my team and Mr. Naimur Rahman for making this workshop a success. Thank you all.